Good evening, everyone, again. So this is our sixth class, sixth week in a row. And whilst the lockdown is going on outside, our exploration of the Upanishads and the Vedas is blossoming, I would say. So we are heading into, as I said last week, into a very exciting phase of how we understand the Upanishads and the Vedas and what is the direction that they give to the souls. Our final destination. So we are about halfway through this discussion, and what I want to do is, like before we start this class, let's do our prayers. So like always, I'm going to pick up the Shanti mantra from Atharvana Veda. So Badram Karanebihi Shunyama Devaha Badram Pashyema Akshabihi Ryajatraha Stirai Rangair Tushtuam Sastanobihi Vyashema Devahitai Yadayuhu Swastinah Indro Vritrashavaha Swastinah Pusha Vishwavedaha Swastinah Tarksho Arishtanemihi Swastino Brihaspati Dadatu Yo Antaha Pravishya Mamavacha Imam Prashuptam Sanjeevayati Akhila Shakti Daraswadamna Anyamshta Hasta Charana Shravanatvagādīn Prana Namo Bhagavate Purushaya Tubhyam Lasatu Srimadananda Tirthendurno Hrudambare Yadvachaschandrika Swanta Santapam Vinikrintati Padavakya Pramanajnan Pranamya Shirasa Gurun Vyakarishye Yatabhutam Vishnu Tattva Vinirnaya. So good evening, everyone. So moving on from where we left last week. So last week we spent quite a lot of time talking about the soul. Let's we could move to this next slide. So last week we spent quite a lot of time talking about the souls. What is the soul? Where is it? What is the size of the soul? What are the coverings of the soul? How does the soul interact with the external world or the material world, and so on? In the previous classes, I think the previous two sessions, we spent quite a lot of time discussing the inner details of creation as discussed in the Vedas and the Upanishads and as elaborated in the Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam. So we discussed about the creation of the universe. Now, the creation of the universe is a central concept in Vedic philosophy. Every Upanishad that you go into will start off by having a detailed discussion on creation, the nature of creation, the purpose of creation, and so on. So just to summarize in brief what the creation is, creation of the material world, that is the Jada Prakriti, comes from the Mula Prakriti or the primordial matter. Now before creation, the primordial matter is in suspended animation in the Supreme's belly. The Jivas are also in suspended animation and they are also placed in the Supreme's belly, so says the Vedas. The Shri Tattva, the Lakshmi, she is also in the belly. Chaturmukha Brahma is also in the belly. So every sentient being that is known in existence is in the Supreme's belly. And then the creation comes about. So there are two aspects to this creation. One is the creation of the material world, which is the evolution of the subtle matter to grosser forms of matter, ultimately resulting in the solid state of matter. It's what we call as Prithvi. So you have the Panchabhuta creations, which is a final set of creations that comes. Before that, as we discussed, there is Sattva, Rajas, Tamas, there is Mahat Tattva, there is Ahankara Tattva, there are three types of Ahankara Tattvas. Each type becomes either Tanmatras and Panchabhutas or Manas, Buddhi, and the various components of this. So this primordial soup or the stew is then made ready for Chaturmukha Brahma and the Ahankara Tattva Abhimani Shiva to then start their creation, and then the Jada, the universe comes into being, which is what we call as the Brahmanda. So now this slide, the evolution of living beings, the one that is right in the middle, Srimad Bhagavatam, essentially we discussed this quite a lot. This summarizes the stages of creation. So Bhagavata Purana tells us that as per the Vedas and the Upanishads, creation happens in 9 stages. The first 5 stages is what I have told you so far, which is the creation of the 24 tattvas. This is called Prakrita Srishti. So Prakrita Srishti is these 24 tattvas then make matter. Okay. Then the 6th stage, we very briefly touched upon it before. Now the 6th stage is important. So this particular verse says, Shashtastu tamasaha sarge yastu abuddhi krutaha prabhoho. So what it essentially means is, the 5 stages, all these matter and everything has been created. Chaturmukha Brahma now is just waiting to create and bring the souls into being, i.e. give the souls their bodies and bring living beings into creation. So we are in that situation. At that time, the verse here says, Abuddhi Kritaha. Abuddhi Kritaha means without Chaturmukha's knowledge, or akasmat as we call it in Sanskrit, suddenly there was ignorance was also created at this point. Tamasaha means, tamas means ignorance. Tamas has various connotations in Sanskrit. It can mean ignorance, it can mean darkness, it can mean that inertia, it can mean a type of guna, it can mean something that is very bad and so on. So there are various connotations, but here it means ignorance. So in the 6th stage, ignorance was created, or ignorance came about without Chaturmukha Brahma's control. And the next word gives us a hint as to who brought this. It says Prabhoho. So Prabhu there is the God himself. So that is the Supreme Vishnu, Narayana himself brought this ignorance also into his creation. Now the reason why bringing this ignorance into creation is very, very important. It's a key concept in Upanishad philosophy, is the creation of ignorance, or the bringing about of ignorance into creation. If, for example, there was no ignorance at all, we would not be having this discussion at this point of time. We don't need to know about the Vedas and Upanishads, because we would all be knowing this already. So that ignorance, the concept of ignorance, it is a positive entity. Ignorance is not absence of knowledge. So that is one view. It's a negative view of ignorance, is absence of knowledge is ignorance. No, according to Vedic philosophy, ignorance is a positive aspect. It's a dravya. It is a material. It is an aspect of creation that is brought about. And this happens during the 6th stage of creation. So I would want you to think and hold on to that idea of creation of ignorance in the 6th stage of creation, because that is key for the journey of the soul, which we are going to deal today and hopefully next week. Now in the 7th stage, so now we have the primordial prakriti, the jivas are coming into creation, and we discussed that before, that the creation of living beings is as per evolution. It fits very well with Darwinian evolution. In fact, it's a bit more complicated and much more scientific and rational, I would say, compared to Darwinism or Neo-Darwinism. So the Upanishad, the Bhagavatam in this canto and also in the previous canto would say, first microbials came on in the sea, and then the plant kingdoms came. And the 7th stage of creation is the creation of the plant kingdom. And it goes on to say there are 6 types of plants. Then in the 8th stage, animal species were created, lower species initially. And in the 9th stage of creation, man was created. So the bringing about of living beings started from microbials, and it evolved in different stages. Finally, it became man. Man was created. Okay. So that is the appearance of the living beings. Now, the concept of ignorance, as I said, was created in the 6th stage. Now, the same Bhagavatam then it goes, if you look at the 7th stage, if you look at the 2nd verse, it talks about how plants are. Plants have, plant kingdom has got the highest amount of ignorance that surrounds them. It goes on to say that they do have consciousness, that they do suffer, and they do have experiences of the external world, but their amount of ignorance is very high. So in that sense, the evolution of living species is, as you go to higher forms of life, the intensity and the scope of ignorance also comes down. And it is generally believed that the human species is the most evolved species on earth with least amount of ignorance. We can debate about that at this point of time, whether we are really enlightened species or not. But at this point of time, compared to a tree, our ignorance is substantially less. Okay, so that's something that I hope I have conveyed this information with this slide, that ignorance and that the intensity of ignorance that evolves as you become higher species. Now, we also discussed last week about souls, the atomicity of the souls, and that they are always in constant communion with the Supreme, and they are in that space which is in the thymus gland. Okay, so we discussed, and I think I provided enough evidence to say that souls exist. Okay, now the key question here, maybe we'll pick it up in our discussion section, and this is a core concept in Vedic philosophy and Vedantic philosophy between various schools. So the question is, who has ignorance? So I have told you about the Bhagavatam, the sixth stage, and the various jivas have ignorance with various intensities. Now this is a key question as to who has ignorance. So do the jivas have ignorance, or Brahman himself, Brahman or the Supreme God himself has ignorance? Okay? So there are two schools here. So the Vishishtadvaita and the Dvaita school of Vedanta would say jivas have ignorance, and that's called Swabhava Ajnanavada. Advaita takes another view, and it says it is not the jivas who have ignorance, it's Brahman who has ignorance superimposed on him. So I just want to introduce this concept. Maybe we discuss this later. Now the next question is this ignorance real, or is this ignorance mithya or unreal or illusory? That is the next question. Then the third question is, what is this ignorance about? So those are the three fundamental questions that the three schools of Vedantas try to address, to try and understand our own purpose of existence and why we need to make this journey. So I've just put this as a question mark for us to perhaps go back and do some homework. But to summarize this slide, the key message there is that ignorance is there. Now, we also discussed the verse from Shvetashvatara Upanishad, which also comes in Mundaka Upanishad and also in Rig Veda. Dvasuparna Sayuja Sakaya Samana Vriksham Parishashya Jate Tayor Anyaha Pipalam Swadvati Anashna Nanyaha Avichakashiti. So we spoke about these two birds, how the other bird is constantly looking at the external world and eating the fruits and suffering, and there is the other bird who is a silent witness, who is just looking at this other bird. So the other bird which is eating all these fruits of the external world is in ignorance. It still has not realized its own position, and it has also not realized that there is an eternal witness that is sitting next to it, or which is actually inside him, and he's unaware of that. That is what the primary ignorance there is, that has actually made this bird go around the external world and suffer and go through samsara. Okay, so that gives you the context or the foundation where we move on to the next slide, Abhijit. So now the key concept here is, we discussed about ignorance. Now, Shvetashvatara Upanishad says, samsara moksha sthiti bandha hetuhu. Okay? It describes this man, describes this deva, as Shvetashvatara Upanishad likes to describe God as deva, and it says, he is the one who has given samsara moksha sthiti bandha hetuhu. Hetuhu means he is the reason for that. Hetu means reason. Bandha means bondage. Okay. Now samsara, moksha. Samsara means bondage in samsara. Moksha means release from this bondage. Okay. So this Upanishad clearly is telling us that it is the Deva or the Brahman himself who is responsible for putting us into this bondage. Okay. Now, I put on the right side, I give a bit of an analogy here of a prisoner going into a prison. So he is locked up in a cell. So the person has locked him up, holds the key. Okay. Now, Skanda Purana then gives another very interesting analogy here. Bandako bhavapashena bhavapachashcha mochakaha kaivalyadaha param brahma vishnureva sanatana. So what it's saying is, Bandako bhavapashena. He is the one who has locked us in this samsara. Bhavapashashta mochakaha. He is the one who has to release us from this bondage. And who is that person? He is a Kaivalyadaha, he is Param, he is Brahma, he is Vishnu, and he is Eva, and he is Sanatanaha. So it gives various attributes and descriptions of the Supreme Lord who has actually put us in bondage. Gita, if you go to chapter 15, 15th verse, Sarvasya cha aham hridi sannivishtaha mattaha smritir jnanam apohanam cha. We saw this before last week. So smriti is memory, jnanam is knowledge, apohanam is ajnanam or ignorance. So mattaha smritir jnanam apohanam cha. I have given the souls the memory, the knowledge, and also the ignorance. So from these various scriptures, we now understand that ignorance that has befallen on the souls and that ignorance that has led us to this bondage in the samsara is actually being put by the Supreme Being before we came into existence, before we came into this universe with a body. Okay? So now, what is our journey? Once we realize this, that we are in bondage because of our ignorance, now we need to somehow get ourselves out of this bondage. Somehow we need this person to unlock us and release us from this bondage. Yeah. So that is what the very first sutra of Vedantasutra of Veda Vyasa, as we all know, and we discussed this before. Om Om Atato Brahma Jignasa Om. So that particular verse, the Atataha, is a big word, is a big Sanskrit word, but split into various ways. We can spend time discussing this later, but by and large, you split it into Ata, Ataha, and Brahma Jignasa. Brahma Jignasa is easy, inquiry into Brahman. Ata means then, Ataha means therefore. So then means once there is eligibility, then, and as Brahman inquiry is absolutely essential for release from samsara or bandha, therefore inquiry into Brahman shall begin. Okay, so that is the core essence of this particular sutra, but this is called Jignasya Adhikaranam. So Jignasya Adhikaranam, the very first sutra of Brahmasutra, is the foundation of philosophy for various Vedantic schools. Now, for example, from the school I come from, there are 3 volumes of text written about just this particular sutra. So does Sri Bhashya of Ramanuja and also Shankara Bhashya. So they deal with Jignasya Adhikaranam in some detail. Okay, so he who has locked us in has to remove the lock. Yeah, so that is a key concept that we need to understand. Moving on to the next slide, Abhijit. So again, we also touched upon this particular concept from Katha Upanishad as to how we have to view our body as a vehicle. Yeah? So in the Katha Upanishad's time, we of course had the chariots. So the Katha Upanishad, as you know, just very briefly to give you a background of Katha Upanishad, it is a part of the Krishna Yajurveda, and it is a dialogue between Yama and Nachiketa. Nachiketa was the son of Uddalaka Aruni. Uddalaka Aruni had 2 children, 2 sons. One is Shvetaketu, the other one is Nachiketa. And these 2 guys, Uddalaka Aruni and Shvetaketu, Uddalaka Aruni and Nachiketa, they come in philosophical discussion in various Upanishads. It's really interesting. So anyway, coming back to Katha Upanishad. So this is a dialogue between Nachiketa and Yama. So Yama says, Atmanam ratidam viddhi, shariram ratamevacha, buddhim tu saratim viddhi, manaha pragraham yevacha, indriyan hayanahuhu, vishayanteshu gocharan, atma indriya manoyuktam, bhokteriti ahur manishina. So this set of 2 verses is a fantastic set. You can use this metaphor to try and lead your life on a daily basis. Basically what it says is the 5 horses of this chariot are your sense organs. The reins of these horses is your mind. The rider is the one that holds these reins, and the passenger there in this chariot is the jiva. So as long as the jiva is going to give the command to the rider, listen, take me to London. And then what the rider does is he uses his reins and he controls his horses so that he takes him to the destination, which is down the M1 to London. Okay? So it is the jiva who's primarily giving that instruction to the buddhi, who is the rider. Yeah? The rein is the mind, and the horses are the indriyas. So Kataka Upanishad then brings this concept of what's called shreyas and preyas. If you as a jiva are going to instruct your buddhi so that your buddhi then takes your horses towards the material world for temporary pleasures. Preyas is temporary pleasures of material world. That is a path of destruction called preyas. On the other hand, If you want to take a path towards Shreyas or path of righteousness, towards Dharma, Artha, Kama and Moksha, the four Purusharthas described in the Vedas and the Vedanta, that's the direction towards Shreyas. So Kataka Upanishad is giving us a metaphor that we can use in our daily life as to maybe you want to ask for every activity that you do, is this praise or is it Shreyas? Try and work it out yourself every day. Probably will come with years and years of practice. So why am I putting this slide here? Because the next slide becomes interesting, because our journey, if we are in this chariot and we are the passengers sitting in this chariot, and if we have to make that destination, we need a starting point and we need a finishing point. Okay, so what is our starting point? What is our finishing point? Believe me, most of us have lived our life so far not even knowing where have we started, where have we come, what is our purpose. We don't even know what our starting point is, let alone what our finishing final destination is. But Jayatirtha in 13th century, Jayatirtha is one of the greatest Vedantic philosophers. So Abhijit, you need to move to the next slide. Thanks. So Jayatirtha in this very, very important avatarika, introduction to his treatise, he basically says, Paramatmano atyanta binnasya swataha chid anandadi atmakasyapi jivasya anadi avidya kama karmadi nimittaha ayam paramartata eva anyata karaha dukkadi anartaha na parameshwara prasadate apagacchati. Nacha asakshat kruto asau prasidati. Nacha avidita swarupaha shakyate shakshat kartum iti sakagunaakarataya nisheshosha gandha vidurataya chatam pratipadayatum aseshamnayaha pravartante tad upakarana bhuta cha brahmamimamsa iti paramartaha. So this introductory verse is the summary of Vedic philosophy or Vedantic philosophy. All the scriptures have gone to actually describe the roots, the mechanisms, and the steps that we need to do this. So what is Jayatirtha telling us here? So he is telling us, the first, if you start from the flag, God's grace is absolutely essential for release from bondage. Why? As I described you in the Shvetashvatara Upanishad, he is the one that has brought ignorance into creation. Sixth stage of creation, he has brought ignorance into creation, and he has brought ignorance to the jivas. He is the one who has tied us. So if he has to untie us, we have to move him. We have to make him untie that. And that moving him to untie our bondage is called grace in philosophy. So that is God's grace. So that is what it means. So me as a jiva is a anadi. I am a Satchitananda Swarupa personally, but anadi avidya kama karmadi nimittaha ayam paramartata eva anyata karaha dukkadi anartaha, which means that because of ignorance I am in this samsara. So na parameshwara prasadat rute apagacchati. That means without that parameshwara's prasada means grace, there is no scope for release. Nacha asakshat kruto asau prasidati, which means how can I get God's grace? How do I move him? How do I move him to get the God's grace? The first step for that is we see him. Unless we see him, we cannot obtain his grace. So that should be our first target, is actually to be able to see God. Vivekananda made that initial discovery as to I want to see God. Yeah. So to see God is the key step here. Okay. Nacha asakshat kruto asau prasidati. That's what it means. Nacha avidita swarupaha shakyate sakshat kartum. That means unless we know him, we cannot see him. Okay. Now, how do we know him? We know him as sakala gunakarataya nishesha dosha gandha vidurataya. That means God should be known as somebody who has infinite auspicious attributes and without any defects. So that is the fundamental definition of the Supreme Being. He who has infinite attributes and no defects. Every school of philosophy, every religion of this world considers the Supreme as an abode of infinite auspicious attributes and without defects. He is a perfect being. Okay, so we need to know that. Now, how can we know that he is a perfect being? Okay, so we need to start somewhere. So it says Ashesha Amnayaha Pravartante. So to inform us of the greatness of God is where all the Amnayahas have started. Amnaya means Vedas. All the Vedas and everything else that comes from the Vedas, that is what they have started. They have started to tell us about the greatness of God. So that is where we need to start. So to understand the greatness of God, then we need to use the Vedas. Now to understand the Vedas, Jayatirtha says, Tad upakarana bhutacha brahma mimamsa iti paramartha. So to understand the Vedas, you need to use the Vedanta Sutras, put them together, understand what the Vedas is saying, know about the Supreme. Eventually, you get to see him. Once you get to see him, then you have a chance of being released from this bondage. So that is the journey that we need to start. Okay, so we probably are not even in the starting point yet, but that is the journey. This is a marathon, not a sprint. I think something that we need to reflect on, that yes, we have started this at this point of time. So maybe with further spiritual progress, at least we might be able to reach the starting point before we start this marathon. Now, that is exactly what Maitreyi was advised by Yajnavalkya. And he said, Atmava are drashtavyaha. So Maitreyi, you have to see the Supreme. That is the final goal of your life, because only if you see him, there is a chance that you will be released from bondage. So Atmava are drashtavyaha. And then he said, what is the steps for that? Shrotavyo, mantavyo, nididhyasitavyaha Maitreyi. To see him, you have to go through the process. You need to do Shrotravya, Mantavya, Nitidhyasitavya, which means you need to hear and learn. You need to revise and ruminate. And then you need to go into deep contemplation or meditation. And then eventually at some point when you do that, you might be able to see him. Again, to see him, you need his grace. So you may be able to see him. So that's what Yajnavalkya is saying, Maitreyi. In Prashna Upanishad, when there is a discourse, fifth question, discourse between Pipala the Rishi, Sa etasmat jivaganat parat param purishayam purusham ikshate. So ikshate means to see. Purishayam and purusham. So purusham is the jiva. Purushayam is he who is inside the jiva. So last week we spoke a lot about antaryami and how the Supreme is inside the jivas as its antaryami. He is also inside everything else in this universe and he is also inside the jivas. So that is purishayam, purusham ikshate. Then Brihadaranyaka Upanishad also celebrates Atmanyeva Atmanam Pashyet. Pashyet again means to see. So Atmani Eva Atmanam Pashyet. So Atmanam there is Jiva. Atmani Eva, that means he has to see this Brahman only. Only then there is a scope. So the Vedic scriptures are very clear with regards to what is that step before you get your release from bondage. Next slide, Abhijit. So then I've just put this one here because the start, we now understand that there is a starting point, that there is a destination, but there is so many, bypasses. We have A roads, B roads and motorways and everything else in between. So it all seems rather complicated. What, where, who, when, why, how, all these questions come about. Do we go this way, that way, or do we have to take a U-turn, for example? Yeah, so there are all these confusions that is there. But if there is one thing that you want to take away from this talk today, just remember this verse from Purusha Shukta in Rig Veda, as you know, Tameva Vidwan Amrita Iha Bhavati Na Anyaha Pantaha Ayanaya Vidyate. That is a key verse from Purusha Shukta, Rig Veda, which says, Tam Eva Vidwan Amrita Iha Bhavati. Vishnu, Purusha, Vishnu is telling us very clearly there, Tameva Vidwan Amrita Iha Bhavati. Only if you know me, you have a scope for Amrita. Amrita means moksha or liberation. Na anyaha pantaha. Panta means path. And he says, Na anyaha pantaha ayanaya vidyate. If you follow the other paths, there is no way in which you are going to have liberation. If you want to go for liberation, then you need to know me, the Supreme Person or the Supreme Lord or the Supreme Brahman. That advice is very clear from Purusha Shukta. So the next question then comes about is, so how can we know the Supreme Person? Can I just pick up a book from Max Muller and learn about the Supreme Brahman, for example? So where do we start? So next stage, next slide. So we need to do. So we need to know. So this brings into the topic which is very important in Vedantic philosophy, is about knowledge. The knowledge per se. So what are the means of knowledge? What is correct knowledge? What is wrong knowledge? So this whole thing has been dissected out in great detail in Vedantic philosophy. Okay? Much more detailed than any of the Western philosophy books that I've seen that have been prescribed in the universities. The pramana and the pramana lakshanas are very, very detailed described in the Vedantic and Vedic philosophy. So I'll just give you a brief overview of this. So how do we know the Supreme? So we need to know what are the means of knowledge, what are the various ways in which we can know anything for a start. So there are three Sanskrit words, jnana, jnatra, and jnaya. So jnaya means the object to be known. Jnatra is the person who knows that object. And when the person sees that object, and knowledge generates in him. So that is called jnana. So that is otherwise known as yatham, which means knowing an object as it is in its is pramana. So if there is a mobile phone on the table, knowing that mobile phone as it is on the table is pramana, in the sense that having that knowledge that that mobile phone is on the table as it is true knowledge. Okay? So that is jnana, jnatra, and jnaya relationship. And the Vedantic philosophers have thought about this in great detail, of what are all the mechanisms of knowing knowledge. So they broadly divided means of knowledge into three. There is something called pratyaksha, then there is anumana, and there is something called agama. So these are the three types of knowledge. Pratyaksha means perception. So direct perception, directly seeing this mobile phone on the table is perceptual knowledge. Okay. Anumana means inferential knowledge, i.e., I am in a different room and I hear a phone ringing in the other room, then I know two things. Because I've heard the phone ringing, I know that there is a phone ringing, and I also infer that this phone that is ringing is on the table in the study room. Okay? That inference is anumana. Okay? But then there is another entirely different group or means of knowledge called agama, or verbal testimony. Now, why is this all important, and why am I actually bringing this along? You will soon find out in the very next slide. So Abhijit, moving on to the next slide. So the next slide essentially is talking to you about perceptual knowledge. Okay, so now this is where our scientists, including all of us who are listening here, we fall very badly. We fall very badly on the ground, because we are constantly, we all think that we have a very scientific bent of mind, and that this whole business of existence of God does not make sense, because there is no instrument or nobody has ever seen this being. So this thing does not exist is a popular philosophy, including the ones that are propagated by atheists such as Richard Dawkins and many others. Here is a direct answer to their flawed philosophy. Okay, so the first one we need to go understand is, can we know about the Supreme through perceptual knowledge? So what is perceptual knowledge? We have 5 indriyas. We have 5 indriyas: eyes, ears, mouth, nose, and skin for touch. So how do we interact with the external world? We have shabda, sparsha, rasa, rupa, and gandha. So with these 5 tanmatras, the 5 indriyas contact with the objects that have these qualities, and the nerve impulses that go from these indriyas go to our brain. Our brain, it goes to the specific aspects of our brain, and then the brain processes it, and the sum total of chemical reactions forms some kind of a process within the mind, and the mind then the buddhi, which is a component of the mind, then processes this further and understands exactly what it is, and then a knowledge is generated. Where is that knowledge generated? The knowledge is not generated in the mind. The knowledge is generated in the soul. The soul then says, yes, I have a knowledge of this rose which is outside in the external world. The knowledge is generated in the soul. The reason being, we discussed last week that consciousness is the symptom of the soul. What is consciousness? Consciousness is the awareness of the self and also of the external world. So that consciousness is placed in the soul. So it is the soul that becomes aware of the external world. Okay. Now, with my sense organs, I can only see so many things. I cannot see a bacteria, for example. So I use a microscope and I see a bacteria. I cannot see the distant stars, so I use the Hubble telescope and I see the distant stars. Or, I don't want to see the distant stars in the normal wavelength of light. I want to go either ultraviolet or infrared. So you use an infrared telescope and you look at the world very far away from our solar system. Or you can go to the CERN laboratory and you can use a cyclotron or any of those things to try and break open the atom, and you use the instrument to understand what is there inside the atom. So you can use these instruments, but at the end of the day, still you use these instruments, you make you assess, you generate a data, and the data is processed by your indriyas, which goes to your brain, your mind, your buddhi. Okay. So what I'm trying to get at is, all that we are doing at this point of time, as scientists or whatever, we are just looking at the external world using instruments and our sense organs. Ultimately, it boils down to our sense organs. Now, can we claim that our sense organs are perfect? That is a big question. Okay. So now, there is what is a true perception? So Madhvacharya, for example, in a work called Pramana Lakshanam, he writes, Nirdosha Artha Indriya Sannikarsham Pratyaksham. That means a defectless contact between the sense object and the sense organs, and the knowledge that is generated by a defectless contact between the two is true knowledge. Now, can we claim that have that perfect contact? Sometimes not, but most of the time we do for our normal transactions of life. Now, the key here is the Vedas and the Vedantic philosophies have already described that this supreme being is beyond matter. Rig Veda, for example, is Paramatraya Tanva Vridana Natve Mahitvam Anvashnuvanti Nate Vishnu Jayamano Najato Deva Mahimnaha Param Antamapa. And it goes on and celebrates this Paraha Matraya. So Paro Matraya, there are various ways of looking at this two verses. So Matra means Tanmatras, Para means beyond. So he's beyond the Tanmatras is one way. Matra means Miti, so which means that he's beyond everything. So if something is beyond matter, no matter what instrument, your material instruments you're going to use, you're not going to be able to see him. Yeah. Then the same thing the Rig Veda also says, again in Purusha Shukta, Purusha eva idam sarvam yad bhutam yad cha bhavyam uta amrutatvasya ishanaha yad annena atirohati. Okay. It says yad annena atirohati. Atirohati means he's beyond. Anna means this world. This world is Anna. Anna is the food that we eat. This world is a food for him because during dissolution he eats it. Yeah. So that's why the Vedic philosophers, Anna is referred to the world. Anna also means Brahman in other contexts. So he says he is beyond this Anna. He is beyond this world. Okay. And Sutra of Veda Vyasa says, Arupavat eva hi tat pradhanatvat. He does not have a material form at all because he is not made of matter. Yeah. Matsya Purana again also says the same thing. Bhautikani hi rupani bhutebhyo asau paro yataha. So that is, so this Bhautikani rupa, this guy does not have. So that is why he is called Arupavan Ataha Proktaha Vatad Avyaktataha Pare. So he is beyond Avyakta, which is matter. That is why he is called Arupa. Again in chapter 15, in the last 3 verses, it is described in great detail. So I would urge you to look into that. So from this we gather that this supreme being whom the Vedas is saying, Tameva Vidvan Amrita Iha Bhavati, he is the only person to be known who will give you salvation. Now we understand, because he is beyond matter, you cannot use your sense organs, you cannot use your instruments to know him. That we understand. Now, understanding this concept would then settle various problems that have happened in philosophy, but also various Upanishads are also giving this idea. as to, because this guy is beyond matter, there are certain things you can't do about it. So Katha Upanishad basically it says Ashabdam, Asparsham, Arupam, Avyayam, Tata, Arasam, Nityam, Agandavachayat. So it describes this Brahman as Ashabdam, you can't hear him. Arupam, he has no form. Avyayam, he is distractless. Tata, Arasam, so you can't taste him. He is Agandavachay, you can't smell him. So you can't do any of this because you are using the sense organs to do all these things for material things. He is beyond material things. Taittiriya Upanishad again would say, Yato vacho nivartante aprapya manasasaha. He is beyond words, he is beyond mind. You cannot reach him. So that is a very, very mystical way of describing this Brahman. Now, if anybody, any atheist who comes to you and says, prove to me that God exists, I would ask you to take this reference from Keno Upanishad and give this to that person. Okay. So Keno Upanishad is also called Talavakara Upanishad, and we described very briefly before. It is part of the Samaveda. The other big Upanishad in Samaveda is Chandogya Upanishad. So Keno Upanishad is a dialogue between Chaturmukha Brahma. So Chaturmukha Brahma is actually telling Shiva, Natatra Chakshur Gacchati, Nava Gacchati no Manaha, you cannot reach him with your eyes, you cannot reach him with your hearing, and so on. But then it says, Yad Vacha Anabhyutitam Yenavak Abhyutyate. Even I cannot, he cannot be, you cannot hear him, but yet your hearing operates because of him. You cannot speak about him, yet his speech, your speech operates because of him. So what it is telling is, I can't describe unto God, but you have to experience this for yourself. Just as how you would use a microscope to see microbes which you cannot see with your eyes, similarly, you use the scriptures as microscope to try and discover and find him, and you experience him. Each person experiences the Supreme in his own way. Each person's experience of Supreme is different. Okay, so it says, Tadeva Brahma Tvam Vidhi, Na Idam Yadidam Upasate. He is right next to you, but you need to know him as that, and you need to experience him as that. So because this God is beyond matter, none of our perceptual knowledge is going to pick him up. And this is the idea that is described in various ways. For example, if you take Shvetashvatara Upanishad, there is a famous verse, and certain schools have picked upon this to describe the Supreme Brahman as attributeless. And I just want to illustrate this point here. Shvetashvatara Upanishad, for example, says, Eko Devaha, Sarva Bhuteshu Buddhaha, Sarva Vyapi, Sarva Bhutantaratma, Karmadi Akshaha, Sarva Bhutadi Vasaha, Sakshi, Cheto, Kevalo, and then Nirgunashcha. Okay. So this verse needs to be looked at very carefully. And as I said before, one should not pluck words from Upanishads and come up with a hypothesis. One should see what the verse is actually saying. So this verse of Shvetashvatara Upanishad is actually describing 9 huge qualities of Brahman. And then it is saying Nirguna. Okay? He said he is Eka, he is Deva, he is Sarva Bhuteshu Buddha, he is in everything. Sarva Vyapi, he is everywhere. Sarva Bhutantaratma, he is in all Jivas. Karmadi, he does all the activities. Akshaha, he is a direct perceptor of everything. Sarva Bhutadi Vasa, he is in all of the material world. Sakshi, he is the ultimate perceiver. Chetaha, he is the greatest consciousness. Kevala, he is Swatantra. And then he says Nirguna. So what that Nirguna actually means is, Nirguna, Guna is Triguna. Triguna is Sattva, Rajas and Tama. So Nirguna means that Supreme Person does not have Sattva, Rajas and Tamo Guna of matter. He is beyond matter. So that is how we understand what Nirguna for Brahman actually means. Not that he is an attributeless zero. Okay? And again, Upanishads also talk about Brahman as Saguna. Saguna means he has all auspicious attributes also, it says. Say, for example, the same Shvetashvatara Upanishad goes on and says, Parasya Shaktihi Vividaiva Shruyate Swabhaviki Jnana Bala Kriyacha. He describes about his strengths, his great attributes. Taittiriya Upanishad, we have discussed this last time. Brahma Vidapnoti Param, Manam, Anantam, Brahma. Satya as a quality, Jnana as a quality, Anantam as a quality. it is defining this Brahman as Satyam Jnanam Anavana. So anywhere in the Upanishads you take, when you understand, when somebody says Nirguna, what it means is Brahman does not have material gunas. When I say Saguna, it means he has non-material, infinite, auspicious attributes. Okay, so that is the core message in that slide. So the questions for us own to contemplate here is, so is this Brahman Nirguna or Saguna? So Vishishta and Dvaita will take, he has infinite non-material attributes but no defects. Advaita would take no attributes, no activity. This is an inert substance on which everything else is superimposed. Buddhism is on a similar plane. We'd also describe this concept of Sunya. Shunya means it is some attributeless, nothing, zero. That is the ultimate truth. Okay? So something for us to think about, and you can find your own answers by reading through scriptures and what the various philosophers of Vedanta have talked about this. So now we understand that direct perception through our senses, we cannot see God. And that we can't do that because God is non-material, he is beyond matter. Okay? Now what about the second form of knowledge, which is logic or reasoning or inferential knowledge? Can that give us an idea about God? Immanuel Kant, for those of Western philosophy students, would know this guy quite well. He is a big Western philosopher, and he writes a book called Critique of Pure Reason, worth reading. Okay, and there he claims God cannot be known by pure reasoning. Okay? He makes a claim. And when I saw this statement, it was very clear that he had plucked it, or maybe he did not know that Katha Upanishad had described this, thousands of years ago. It said, Naisha Tarkena Matirapaneya Prokta Anyeneva Sugnanaya Preshta. Tarka means logic or reasoning. So Yama is saying, Na Ishaha Tarkena Matihi Apaneya. Okay? So that Isha, you cannot know him by logic or reasoning. And again, this is a very popular fallacy and thing that we have, that somehow if we become spiritual, or somehow we get into Vedas and Vedantas, we become illogical, unreasonable people. But I just want to remind those people who think us that way, that the Vedic philosophy and the Vedantic philosophers have dissected out Anumana or logic or the reasoning in minute detail. The whole philosophy of Nyaya, Tarka Shastra, describe this in great detail also. What are the various components of reasoning? What is the position of reasoning in Pramanas, for example? So, in Pramana Lakshanam, this is to give you a very easy, broad overview of this is, our philosophers will actually say any reasoning or logic has 5 components. Pratigna, Hetu, Udaharana, Upanaya, Nigamana, Pancha, Avayavaha. Okay, so Pratigna means mountain has fire. That is my claim. Hetuhu, because it has smoke. Udaharana, where there is smoke, there is fire, which is called invariable concomitance between smoke and fire. In Sanskrit parlance, it's called Vyapti, as in a kitchen. Upanaya, such a smoke exists in this mountain, thus the mountain has fire. So this is the basic components of inference. Now, the text, the Vedic philosophy discusses each aspect and talks about great details. Let's not waste time here. But this is just to introduce you the concept. Even logic and reasoning cannot be used to prove God, because logic and reasoning is a dependent proof. It is not an independent proof. The reason being, in this example that I've cited about the mountain, you're doing 2 perceptions with your eyes. Number 1, you're perceiving the smoke, which is material. Number 2, you have perceived a similar smoke and fire in a kitchen, maybe day before yesterday. So you have had 2 perceptions, and you link 2 perceptions to come to a logical conclusion as to what is going on in this mountain. Then you get the knowledge of the fire being present in the mountain. So even for inferential knowledge, you need perception. You need 2 perceptions to generate the inferential knowledge, minimum 2 perceptions. So that tells you that logic itself is a dependent proof. It is not an independent proof at all. And anybody who claims with logic they can disprove God is seriously wrong. And anybody who also will prove God through logic is also wrong, because both ways it will not work. Because if you use perception, you will never be able to get to the bottom of the problem, because God is non-material. Okay? But that perception you use in your day-to-day life, and let me tell you, as somebody who runs a research group, most of the time what we are using in our day-to-day work is logical reasoning based on perception. Okay? It's got its own limitations, and we need to understand that. Without understanding the limitations, we can't move to our journey, we can't start our journey. Okay? Moving on to the next slide. So then we have to now understand, if God cannot be known by perception, if God cannot be known by inference, then it means that God can only be known through revealed scriptures. That is the conclusion of the Vedas, the conclusions of all the Vedantic philosophers and of all the religions of the world. They've all concluded this, that God can be known only through revealed scriptures, be it the Bible or the Torah or the Vedas. You can know the God only through revealed scriptures. Veda Vyasa wrote a very important sutra, third sutra. It's called Shastra Yonitva. So you can know him only through the Shastras, is the meaning of that word. Madhva, for example, in his very important work called Vishnu Tattva Nirnaya, he starts off saying, Sadagamaika Vigneyam Samatita Kshara Aksharam Narayanam Sada Vande Nirdosha Asesha Sadgunam. So he says in the first line, Sadagamaika Vigneyam. That means Sada Agama Eka Vigneyam. So that is how you separate that word. Sada Agama, which means Sad Agama or Sada Agama. Always through Agamas and always through authentic Agamas is only you can know him. And then he goes on and defines what are these Sadagamas. And he gives an evidence from Brahmanda Purana. So Brahmanda Purana says, Rigadya Bharatam Chaiva Pancharatra Mata Akilam Mula Ramayanam Chaiva Puranam Chayetadatmakam Yeche Anuyayinas Tesham Sarvetecha Sadagama. Okay. Duragamas Tadanyeye Tairnagneyo Janardana. So what that means is Rigadya. Rigadya means Rig, Yajur, Sama and Atharvana Veda. So 4 Vedas. Bharatam, which means Mahabharatam. Then Pancharatra Agamas. Pancharatra Agama is the 6th. And then Mula Ramayanam. So these seven are the core Agamas by which we can know the Supreme. Then it says Yeche, and then he also talks about Puranas. Okay. So Mula Ramayanam Chaiva Puranam Cha Etadatmakam. Okay. So these Puranas, they all form the 7. Then he says Puranas that concur with the 7. Okay. And then anything else that concurs with these sets. So the 7 core texts and the Puranas, anything, for example, what I have told today or what Sudarshan is going to say tomorrow, if it concurs with these Agamas, that is also Agama, because it gives you the knowledge of the Supreme. But then it says, Duragamas Tadanyeye Tairnagneyo Janardana. Anything that does not tell you about the Supreme is Duragama. Duragama is not worth the study. It is not a scripture. That is the different, that is the classification. Okay. So that is what we need to hold in our minds. So these are all the core scriptures that all acharyas, not just Madhva, Ramanujacharya has also said exactly the same thing. Now, I want to pick on one of the things here. So, Abhijit, just stay on the previous slide. Pancharatra Agamas, for example. I want to just spend 1 minute talking about Pancharatra Agamas, which many of you may not be familiar with. And Mula Ramayana, you may not be familiar with. All the Ramayana that we know today is Valmiki Ramayana. Who said that Valmiki Ramayana is the original Ramayana? Is anybody is going to be claiming that they are miserably wrong? Valmiki Ramayana is a version of Ramayana. There is an original Ramayana that exists. It's called Mula Ramayana. That Mula Ramayana was told by Hayagriva Nama Paramatma. So Vishnu in the form of Hayagriva actually gives it to Chaturmukha Brahma. So that is the Mula Ramayana. And everything else that has come through is part of the Mula Ramayana. Pancharatra Agamas, for example. Again, Pancharatra Agama is Vishnu in Hayagriva form gives this over 5 nights to 5 important people. Chaturmukha Brahma, Garuda, Sesha, Rudra, Vishwaksena. So for these 5 guys, Hayagriva Nama Paramatma gives this scriptures. Okay. So these two, the Pancharatra Agama and Mula Ramayana, also form a core text for Dvaits and Vishishta Dvaita schools. They form a core essence of the Vaishnava school of philosophy. Now, moving on to the next slide, Abhijit. So then very briefly, so I think Sudarshan, this would need an entirely different section to talk about the Vedas. But all that I want to tell you in this particular slide, and I'll just go through, I might have another 10-15 minutes to go through this. So Vedas, as I said, so you have Vedas, Rig, Yajur, Sama, Atharvana Vedas described as the Sadagamas. Okay? Vedas are on a separate pedestal compared to Mahabharata, Moola Ramayana, Pancharatragamas and Puranas. Why? Because they are unauthored. They are considered to be apaurusheya. So apaurusheyattvat vedasya. So they are uncomposed. No human being, no divine being has actually composed the Vedas. This is the core understanding of Vedic philosophy. This is the core foundation of the Hindu philosophy. Is we base our philosophy and our knowledge based on the Vedas, which we consider are unauthored. Sutra of Badarayana says, Navilakshanatvadasya tatatvancha shabdat, and he goes on to describe that. Now, we will talk about why it is apaurusheya in a different platform, but I just want you to hold on to that concept. Pipala the Shruti, for example, will say, you know what is the real meaning of Veda? It says, Na indriyani, na anumanam, Vedahi eva enam tasma vedayanti tasmat ahuhu vedaha. It is called Veda, not because Veda, we all know Veda comes from the root word called vid. Vid means to know. So even if I take my phone, I can know something, but that does not become the Veda. The Veda's definition is given by Pipala the Rishi. He says, Na indriyani, which means through perception, I cannot get the knowledge. Na anumanam, by inference, I cannot get that knowledge. Okay. Vedahi enam vedayanti. So it is through the scripture that I can know. That is why it is called Veda. Okay. Taittiriya Brahmanam also will say, Na avedavin manutetam bruhantam sarva anubhum atmanam samparaya, which means he who does not know the Vedas will not know the Supreme Being. Or he who does not know the scriptures that are derived from the Vedas will not have a knowledge of the Supreme Being and will never reach liberation, is the declaration of the Rishi of the Taittiriya Brahmanam. So the three reasons why Vedas are considered so important for the Hindus is because of the three reasons. One is apaurusheya, which means it's unauthored. So there is no defects of a writer. We all know what defects we have when we write a paper, for example. Nityatva, it is eternal. And there is something called swataha pramanya, which is self-valid. So these are the three pillars on which the validity of the Vedas rest. But we also know that the Vedas are infinite. Although Veda Vyasa has compiled them before, Vedas by definition are infinite. So does that mean I have to spend my whole bloody life reading this or multiple lives and I'll still not be able to read the Vedas? So Garuda Purana gives us a bit of a caution and gives us a bit of a solace here. It says, Natat idrum hitagnyayam navachyam nacha tarkyate Pashyanto api na pashyanti mero rupam vipashtitaha. It's a beautiful analogy there. He says, of course, you can't know it by your senses, you can't know it by tarka, but you can know him through the Vedas as per your capacity. And how will that be? It's like Pashyanto api na pashyanti mero rupam vipashtitaha. Some of us have gone to the Himalayas. Some of us have been to various Badris and other trips. I know Sudarshan has been all the way up to the bottom of Everest. So we've all been there. Has anybody hugged the Everest mountain? Has anybody hugged the Himalayan mountains? No. We go there, we touch it, and then we feel that we have known the mountain. So similarly, we use our capacity, use the Vedas and know something about the Supreme and feel that we have known him. We cannot know him fully, but we can know him as per our capacity. That is the caution from Garuda Purana. So now moving on to the next slide. So that is about the Vedas. Now what about Itihasa Puranam, Panchamo Vedanam, Vedaha? So we all know that Itihasas and Puranas are now called Panchamo Veda. They are also called the fifth Vedas. They are also very authentic. Why? Now Pramana Lakshanam describes Nirdoshaha Shabdaha Agama. So which means a scripture is valid as long as it has no defects. That makes sense. That is simple. So Tattva Prakashik of Jayatirtha gives further clarification. It says, Vakya Pramanyam Tavat Nirdoshataya Sambhavati. Nirdoshatacha Apaurusheyataya Optimulataya. So it describes, if a scripture is authentic, it can be authentic only based on two criteria. One, either it is unauthored like the Vedas, or it is authored by somebody who is authentic, who is a valid person. So apti mulataya means, apti means somebody who is a valid person who has written that scripture. So those are the two criteria when we decide a piece of work or any writing is valid or not. So then there are further descriptions. Who is that apti? The apti, actually there are three criteria. So for apti mula, you need to have vaktru, shrotru and prasanga. What that does mean? Vaktru means he who is speaking or he who is writing should be valid. Shrotru means he who hears should be valid. Prasanga means the conducive environment or the atmosphere in which this discussion happens should also be valid. Okay, those are the three essential criteria for any aptatva, with vaktru aptatva being the highermost. That is, the person who says should be valid. So now if you take Bhagavad Gita, Bhagavad Gita is such a big deal for us. Who spoke the Bhagavad Gita? Krishna, who is Lord himself. Who did he speak to and who listened to Krishna? Arjuna, who is Indra himself, who is such an exalted being. So this is a conversation between Krishna and Indra, where in the context of a battle, where there is this major issue as to fight or not to fight, to go towards dharma or to go towards adharma. So that discussion, that environment is conducive and the speaker is authentic and the listener is authentic. So we Hindus give great importance to Gita. Now what about Brahmasutras? As I said, this is the dictionary for the Vedas. So Brahmasutra is composed by Veda Vyasa, who is Narayana's incarnation himself. So Narayana, so how does it happen? I'll tell you in the next slide. But basically Narayana taught this Chaturmukha Brahma, Rudra, Indra, Yama, on. That is how the Vedantasutra also came into being. So there, Narayana, who is the most authentic person, he is talking to the most eligible listeners. Again, that also becomes very, very conducive. In the conducive atmosphere, I'll tell you in the next slide. So again, Brahmasutras are also important for us. Okay, so now that gives you an idea as to why we are currently in modern day life, why we give so much importance to Gitas and why we give importance to Brahmasutras and why we are giving importance to Upanishads, because Upanishads form part of the Vedas, which is Apaurusheya. So these are authentic texts. Now the other slide, moving on to the last two slides, Abhijit. So the next slide basically is to inform you that Veda Vyasa is incarnation of Narayana. So there are lots of confusions that is around. Somebody talks Maharishi Veda Vyasa. When they say Maharishi Veda Vyasa, I feel very sad when they say that, because there is endless scriptural evidence to say that Veda Vyasa is incarnation of Lord Narayana himself. The evidence is, I forgot to put the evidence for that big verse I put. It's basically Skanda Purana, which basically gives you a situation where Narayana takes incarnation as Veda Vyasa. It says Narayana Vinishpannam Jnanam Krita Yuge Sitam, and it goes on and it says Satyavati and Parashara Muni, and then Narayana took incarnation because Brahma, Rudra and Sesha go to Narayana and say, look, the world is completely lost at the end of the Dwapara Yuga. Nobody knows what's happening. Vedas are lost. Please, can you do something? So at that time, Chaturmukha Narayana takes incarnation in Satyavati and Parashara, and then he compiles the Vedas, he writes the Puranas, and then he writes Mahabharata, then he writes the Vedantasutra and so on. So that is how it comes along. Even in Gita 10:37, it says, Muninam api aham vyasaha. Clearly he says that in 10:37. If you go to 15:5, if you look at the last line, Vedashta sarve rahameva vedyaha, Vedanta krit vedavid devechaham. Vedanta krit. Vedanta means Vedanta Sutras. Krit is written it. I am the written the Vedanta krit. And then he says, Vedavid devecha aham. I only know all the Vedas, and I am the one who has written Vedanta krit. It's very clear there in this. So if Veda Vyasa is incarnation of Narayana, then Narayana has written Mahabharata and Gita and the Vedanta Sutra. No wonder it is a key text for our reading. Now you may ask, how can you prove that Narayana is the highest? I'm going to say it's somebody else who is the highest. There is enough Vedas, evidence from the Vedas to actually prove this. Yes, Sarvajnaha Sarvavid. So for example, if you take Mundaka Upanishad, yes, Sarvajnaha Sarvavid, Jnanamayam Tapaha, and it goes on. Taittiriya Upanishad, again it says Brahma Vidapnoti Param, as I said, and the Sahasra Shirisha Purusha, they're all evidence to say that this Purusha Narayana is the highest person. He's Sarvajnaha Sarvavid. And that is the reason why you have this concept called the Prasthana Trayas. Shankara, Ramanuja, and Madhva have based their philosophy based on this foundation of Prasthana Trayas. Brahmasutra Prasthana, Upanishad Prasthana, and Gita Prasthana. So they've all taken these three as foundations to come up with their philosophies, largely because these three texts are authentic, because either they are Apaurushaya, like the Upanishad Prasthana, or they have been composed by Lord Narayana in his incarnation as Veda Vyasa, as Brahmasutra or Bhagavad Gita, which is part of the Mahabharata. So all the three great philosophers of India have used these three texts to come up with their philosophy. So again, we need to understand this. Now, Upanishad Prasthana, there I put 108 and I've scaled you, but all the three philosophers have used 10 Upanishads, by and large 10 Upanishads to come up with their philosophies. Okay. Now, Veda Vyasa is also the composer of the Puranas. And I just wanted to put that for completion, because Matsya Purana again gives a very clear definition of this, and it divides various Puranas. And I know we are doing Bhagavatam class. Where does Bhagavatam comes? Bhagavatam was written by Veda Vyasa, and it is part of the Satvika Puranas, along with Vishnu Purana, Narada Purana, Garuda Purana, Padma Purana, and Varaha Purana. They all form what is called the Satvika Puranas. And Veda Vyasa wrote 18 Puranas, divided them into 6 each to cater to different types of souls. Yeah. So Bhagavata Purana was also composed by Veda Vyasa, and that is the reason why it is an authentic text, and it is a summary of the Upanishad philosophy, and we read it with great enthusiasm. So now the roadmap seems to be vast. Now, this slide, for example, tells you there are about 10,000 Rigveda mantras and about 2,000 each in Samaveda, and Atharvana has 5,000, all the Ramayanas and so on. So it's a huge roadmap that we have. We don't have a single Bible to read it. But I think the key here is, if we don't have time in this life or the next life to read all of this, at least we focus on the three Prasthana Trayas that the three Acharyas have given us. Then I think we will be able to find a direction towards our journey. So what I want to do is, this is my slide. So having given you this view as to, even before we start our journey, it is very, very important for us to understand that A, we understand what the starting point is. B, we understand where the destination is. And most importantly, we need a proper guide map. We need a road map to try and get to our destination. And of course, when we open the AA roadmap, you can reach a destination with different routes. So the Vedas and the Vedantic Upanishads, they take these 4 routes. They describe 4 routes: Karma Yoga, Jnana Yoga, Dhyana Yoga, and Bhakti Yoga, to reach our destination. So what I hope to do is, having introduced this concept, next week probably we will tackle this problem of Dhyana, Karma, Jnana, and Bhakti, and how does the Vedantic philosophy and how the Acharyas have come up with different views of where the destination is going to be. So I'll stop there. Krishna Pranamastu, and I think time for discussions.
Oh, thank you, Madhu. Wonderful lecture once again. We have time for questions. If people want to unmute their audio and ask the questions, please.
Madhu, could I ask a question?
Now,
Ajit.
Yeah, Ajit, go on.
Please name yourself.
It's Ajit.
Who's that? Sorry. Ajit. Hi, Ajit.
Hi, Madhu.
Show yourself to us. Give us your darshan.
Well, thank you for a fantastic talk, Madhu.
Thank you.
The question really was that, as you mentioned, that you cannot see the Lord using your material because it's God isn't material. You cannot see them using your senses, which you use to see material. But you also say that we should be aiming to see God. So,
yes. Okay, wonderful question, Abhijit. That's a beautiful question. Can I ask you to go to slide 9? Can you move to slide 9? It helps all of us to try and understand this concept. So that's the challenging bit here. As to, we are saying we can't see him, but still it says you have to see him. Okay, so in that figure, what I have showed you is you have the soul, that is non-material. The soul is covered by material coverings, the subtle coverings and the gross coverings with which it interacts with the external world. There are two types of indriyas that the Vedic philosophies talk about. So there is something called the non-eternal indriyas made of matter. So that is your eyes and your nose and your mind that is made of matter. Whereas the Jiva Swarupa, which is non-material, itself has got its own eternal indriyas, as we call it. Okay, so what we need to do is we need to completely silence our mind. That I was going to tackle that next week, how that should happen. But the core there is you shut off your material indriyas. When that happens, your Jiva Swarupa awakens. And your Jiva Swarupa indriyas, which is non-material, will see the non-material God. We discussed about Pratibimba within the soul. So this soul will turn inwards and see the Supreme through its own eternal Swarupa Indriyas. And that is what happened for Krishna and Arjuna equation in the 10th chapter when he had the Vishwarupa Darshana of the Lord. Okay, so that is the reason why our great Yajnavalkya advised to Maitreyi, Atma va are drashtavyaha. So you see that Atma through your Atma. So you as an Atma see that Antaratma using your Swarupa Indriyas. I hope that made sense. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Makes sense. Thanks.
Any other question? But can you introduce yourself and also where you are from, please? Which town you are from or which country you are from as well? Thank you.
This is Suresh. Can I ask a question, Madhu?
Yeah,
sure, yes.
Sorry, we can't hear you clearly, Suresh. Can you speak again and tell where you are from?
I'm speaking from London. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah, please go on.
So, Madhu, the question is more from last week's lecture, in between the relation between the Atma and Paramatma. We did say that there is a state of utter helplessness or total dependence. But we also say that the Jiva has the freedom of action, because the action of the Jiva determines what's going to happen, the karma which comes along with it. So where do you draw the line? Where does this freedom end and where does this total dependence start? Or is everything preordained and there's nothing, there's no, so that's the confusion I had. Where do you draw the line?
Yeah. So Suresh, again, that is a wonderful question. It is a key question for Karma Yoga. So anybody who wants to really understand what this Karma Yoga is, what is a Nishkama Karma Yoga, what is Sakama Karma Yoga, this is the key crux of the problem. If, for example, you're raising some fundamental questions. We've all discussed last time that one of the activities of the sentient being is ability for self-initiated action. So when we discussed when we had lectures on creation, there was one sutra called Rachana Anupapatteshta Na Anumanam Om. So that is one of the sutras from Badarayana where he says self-initiated action can come only from a sentient being. A stone cannot do a self-initiated action. So our philosophy starts there. So now we accept that the sentient beings have self-initiated action. Okay, the self-initiated action then gives you the concept of what's called the free will, whether the soul is able to act as per whatever it wants, whether it has complete free will or not. Okay, so this is the crux of the problem. Now, without dragging it for too long, the Vedic philosophy there is so there is again Veda Vyasa. There are 10 sutras that Veda Vyasa has settled exactly the question that you asked. So Karta, Shastra, Arthavatu Om. So there are 10 sutras following that, actually describing, yes, Jiva, he takes all the three possibilities. If total Jiva is utterly dependent and helpless, then you could almost say that Jiva is akarta, that he's not doing anything and the Supreme Being is doing. And then there are also lots of verses in the Upanishads and Veda saying that Jiva is also karta, because the Vedas dictate you have to do this yajna, you have to do that yajna, you have to do jyotishtoma, you need to do this yaga, that it asks you to do various karmas, vidhis, various karmas, you have to do samskaras and so on. So the jivas are also doing action in that. So how do you square this circle? So the key philosophy there is jivas are doers, but they are dependent doers, and the Lord allows them that free will based on their innate capacities and based on their innate nature. He allows them to do their own activities. This is, for example, we touched upon this last week about that verse in Mundaka Upanishad about creation, where we said yata purnanabihi sujate, and then we said yata pruthivyam oshadayaha sambhavanti. That means seeds are put in the soil, and each seed grows and becomes a particular tree. For example, a neem seed becomes a neem tree. A mango seed becomes a mango tree. A neem seed can never become a mango tree. A mango seed can never become a neem tree. But still, the neem seed, with its activity, becomes into a tree and it performs its function based on its inherent capacity and attributes. And all that the Supreme is doing is allowing that nurturing environment of a soil, water, sunlight, and so on, so that this soul can then operate and then it brings forth its inherent attributes and its destination that it decides. So yes, free will is there, but in Vedic philosophy, it is called the dependent free will. This particular concept is called Jiva Kartrutva Vada. And it is a separate talk for discussion. So maybe in Karma Yoga, when we do next week, we'll spend some time talking about what this actually means. Where does the action of action comes from? Who performs the action? There are some Vedantic schools which says jivas are inactive. They are attributeless, they are inactive, they don't do everything. Actions come from the brain and the mind. There are other schools which says the action comes from the jivas. So what are the concepts and why Krishna has given such a big importance to Karma Yoga in his Bhagavad Gita? We can touch upon that. Sorry, I dragged on a little bit, but I just wanted to give you a flavor. Thank you. A great question.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, Nandesh.
Hi, Madhu. Hi again. Can I ask you a question? It's Nandesh from Huddersfield.
Yeah, go on, please.
Yeah. Again, fantastic lecture, Madhu. So, a slight confusion in regards. We touched upon destination earlier. So, how is every soul's destination to achieve moksha, or so are there different destinations there, or so? I was trying to understand how much is within a soul's purview, or how does it so very confused about the destination part.
Yeah, so yeah, I think it's a big question. It's a complicated question. So if you look at various religious systems of the world, okay, so let's take Christianity for example. Let's take the Christian theology. Christian theology is you have a judgment day. Depending on what good activities you do, what bad activities you do, then there is a decision that is made. So if you have done good activities, and then okay, fine, you go to heaven. And if you have done bad things, you go to hell. So that is one view from a Catholic theology. That is how they approach this problem. The other way of looking at it is, if you look at, say, our own Vedic schools, for example, if you start with a point that the key we discussed three concepts. There is Brahman, there is Jiva, and there is Jada. Three entities in all of existence. So the first understanding there is, what is the relationship between Brahman and Jiva? Okay. If, for example, the scheme divides into two. If you are different from Brahman, there is a view. If you are same as Brahman, there is a view. Okay. If you are different from Brahman, and you as a Jiva, as an atomic entity, is distinct and different, eternal, uncreated, will always exist forever, then there are two ways of looking at it. three ways of looking at it. One view is all the souls are eligible for liberation. So that is a utopian great view of saying we are all there, our final destination is liberation, we go towards liberation. All souls, there are infinite souls, we have somehow come into samsara, we should go back to our original destination. So all souls achieve moksha. That is one view. There is the other view which says, look guys, this is complicated. If all souls are the same, if they are all going to be going to liberation, how do you account for inequality in this world? How do you account somebody is good, somebody is bad, somebody is rich, somebody is poor? How do you account for that? That is a problem. If all souls are the same, why is all souls not good? Why are all souls not rich? Why are all souls not beautiful? No, we are seeing differences everywhere in the universe. Every leaf is different, every atom is different from another atom, every subatomic particle is different, everything seems to be different from everything else, seems to be the nature of the universe and nature of creation and nature of existence. Why should it be different for jivas? So there is another view there saying that each jiva is different. So there are two views there. So if you take everybody is the same, everybody goes to moksha. But if you take each person is different, then there is a three classifications of souls. Predestination of souls, which is very similar to the Catholic view. The Catholic theology also has predestination of souls. They either go to heaven or they go to hell. Similarly, there is a predestination of souls in the second view. Some will be eligible for moksha, some will be eligible for andha tamas, and some will be eligible to be constantly in the cycle of samsara. So that is the second view. The third view is if Jiva and Brahma are the same, Jivo Brahmaiva na paraha, if both of them are the same, then there is actually no liberation or no moksha. It is irrelevant to talk about moksha if Brahmatma Aikya is accepted. It is irrelevant because there is nothing that needs to be attained. You are already Brahman. It is not that in the future you are going to become Brahman. You are already Brahman now. So where is the need for moksha? So those are three different views around this. So I think it's an interesting area to explore and study and see where your own views fit into this.
Right.
Thanks for that.
And you could probably use that example with the tree showing actually two birds. I guess if there's only one bird, then it's Atma and Paramatma, so both.
Yeah, so yeah, you're right, Nandesh. So what I have not described there is I haven't gone into the Sanskrit etymology and grammar. I haven't gone into Niruktam and I haven't gone into Vyakarana. So let me go to that one. So it says Dwa Suparnau. That is the word. Dwa means two. Suparnau. Now in Sanskrit means two. It's also a Dvandva. Okay. So this verse is saying two Suparnau. Suparnau means two species. So this verse is clearly saying there are two different species of birds. One is the supreme being who is a different species, and the second one is the jiva who is a different species. So all those nuances come in at that point where all the Vedantic philosophers debate and spend and waste their time on. But essentially, this is where the basic is, and you just work out what works for you and what you feel is appealing to yourself. So, but the way I would conclude this particular question is, philosophy should not be given with a sugar-coated pill. Yeah, philosophy is a very hard player. It really plays a hard game here. If philosophy means, so one of the definitions of philosophy is determination of things as they are in themselves. So for such a determination, you need to use experience as a foundation in which you need to start philosophizing. If you don't use experience to start your philosophy, then it becomes complicated. A philosophy which is not based on experience is dry speculation. Whereas a philosophy that is goes against experience is not philosophy at all. So a philosophy should give an explanation of what we are experiencing in the world. So that should be what is called Sakshi Anubhava. So we have to base our philosophy with what we experience in our daily world, daily life. Now, I would challenge, am I experiencing that I am Brahman? No. So I would space this argument based on simple experience. There are endless Vedantic scriptures to debate that. I am not experiencing I am Brahman, full stop. So I cannot be Brahman. So now I'll move on and make further assessments. That would be my approach, but others may have a different approach. Thank you, Nandesh.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. Thanks, Mother.
Hello.
I got Uncle, go on.
Hi, I'm Manjunath calling from Stoke. Thank you, Mataji, for your excellent lecture. Hello, can you see me?
Yeah, I can. Yes, hello. Yes.
All right. Hello, hello. Thank you for excellent lecture. One basic question I'm asking, maybe, you know, when the conception happens,
Yeah.
you get the embryo. Out of the million sperms, one gets into the and makes the life. Now that is the beginning of life. Now, at what time the God implants soul into the system? Does the light come at a time?
Okay, that's a nice question. So this is discussed in great detail in Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. Okay, so you would actually be surprised. So you would be surprised about the level in which our Vedic rishis have actually understood this problem. And sometimes I wonder, how did they know all this? So in Sanskrit, semen is called retas. Okay, that is a Sanskrit term for it. So this Upanishad and the Rishi talks about what happens to the millions of jivas in the semen. And he says they make this journey into this dark tunnel and they have a battle. They are suffering there also. There is suffering even there. And the Rishi says they are competing with each other. And then finally, the Supreme Being decides this one, this jiva, this sperm will get into that egg and will form an embryo. Okay, so it goes at great detail. So the ones that have missed the opportunity will have to go down and start the cycle again. And the rishis talk about how the jivas make that cycle. They fall down, they go up, they go to the clouds, they are in the rain, they fall down in the rain droplets, then they go into plants, they sit in the plants, the man eats the plant, the jivas in the man then go into the testicles, they go sit into the semen, and they are all sitting there, and then they are competing again. So they go through this cycle. So in that view, the jivas are there in the sperms. They come through the purusha, and then the yoni is the strilinga, is the woman where the womb is. Now you are actually raising a fantastic concept here, because in creation, if you remember our first creations, mama yonihi mahat brahma tasmin garbham dadami aham. Okay, there is a Gita verse of talking about exactly that, and he says that is what I did in original creation. I passed my stuff into this garbha of Lakshmi, Sri Tattva, and then all the chetanas were created. So that very first system to create a chetana, which is to give a body to a chetana, you need two chetanas to create one chetana. Whereas only one chetana is required to create a jada, such as a pot, where only one potter is required. So Krishna is actually telling us, look, I have made this system already, that this is how I'm going to do it. So I digressed a little bit, but coming to your point, the jivas are in the sperms and they go into the egg. Which jiva goes into the egg is decided by the Supreme, so says the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, and it clarifies that this Retas has got millions of jivas in it, which is absolutely in concordance with the medical view of how this happens.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Madhu.
Does the light come? Does the light come at the time?
Sorry?
That happens when the conception happens. I don't know. I read somewhere that some light comes, which you can actually see. I mean, if you got technology.
Yeah. Oh, that will be really interesting. But we pass on that article. I'll have a look through it. But that sounds an interesting idea about the light.
Fluorescent lights. I mean.
Okay, Uncle. This somebody.
Thank you very much.
I have a question, Sudarshan. Hello, Madhu. Sumati here from Stafford.
Hi.
Hi. So based on, I'm just trying to comprehend, based on our Pancha Indra in our past karmic cycle, so whatever we have perceived through our Pancha Indra, so it's a continuum now that we have, and we are in our ongoing journey.
Yeah.
So based on that, we are enhanced and still seeking and searching. Am I right? I'm just trying.
So yeah, I think I got some of the. Do you want to rephrase it? I think I got what you're asking at. Do you mind just rephrasing? Are you saying that depending on what we do in this birth?
No. Based on, you spoke about the Indras. That's our senses.
Senses,
Our
yeah.
perception, etc.
Yeah.
Our
Yeah.
visual, all our 5 senses. Based on our past existence, based on our Pancha Indras, we have taken birth now. So
Yeah.
do we continue in our seeking of knowledge, which is ignorance, which is good, right? So it's a continuum, right? It is
Yes.
not a step down. We are elated. Do you get what I'm trying to say?
So I
It's
think
an
the key
ongoing, it's a continuum seeking of knowledge. Or
Yes.
the more I know, I feel, the more I don't know, to be honest with you.
Yeah. So I think that's I think that's true. The more you know, then you realize the more you don't know. So this particular view is actually captured very, very beautifully by our Upanishad rishis. So in Mundaka Upanishad, the rishi will actually say, Avijñātam vijanatam, vijanatam avijñānatam. So that means he knows actually does not know. He who knows that he does not know actually knows. So that kind of concept is captured very nicely by the rishi, basically saying the more we want to learn, the more we realize that we know very little, number one. Number two, coming back to your question about, I think you're getting at karmas, I think, about how this karmic imprints, this is an ongoing process. You're absolutely right. So it is our karmic imprints that ultimately decides what kind of birth that we're going to get next and how many more births we're going to get next. So that is why hold on to the concept of Shreyas and prayers, because in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna is coming to that again and again. Look how I create the world. I don't have any attachment, but I create this world. Why don't you strive to be like me? If you strive to be like me, how I create this world, then that is your only solution to actually prevent rebirth. So he talks a lot about this. So maybe in Karma Yoga can deal with that particular question. Thank you.
Madhu,
Thank
Yeah,
you.
Chitra, hi.
Peter has said like his microphone is not working, so he's just given the question. Is it okay to read it to you?
Yeah, please.
Yeah.
Name the individual from here, please. The gentleman,
Sorry?
where is he asking? Who is the gentleman and where is he asking questions from?
Yeah, Sridhar from Stoke.
Oh, our Sridhar, yes.
Yeah, our Sridhar, yeah. If Jiva controls intellect, do we have free will? Current scientific thinking is that we do not have a free will, don't have 100% control of what we do. Also, how is free will related to karma?
Yeah, okay, excellent. I think a similar question was asked by one of the other friends initially about free will. So the answer to that is he is absolutely right. We have an amount of will. You can call it free will, but it is a dependent free will. And the view of neuroscience, neuropsychology, and the Vedantic view is absolutely the same. We have an element of dependent free will, and that dependence is dependent on the Supreme because he is allowing us. So in Bhagavatam, there is a verse 2:10-12. It's not coming to me right now. So he talks about this very, very nicely. Yeah, about karma, jiva swabhava, everything is coming because ed anugrahataha santi nasanti edupekshaya. So it says all these things happen because of me. So jiva swabhava, okay, the jiva swabhava, the jiva swabhava is manifested in its free will. And in Bhagavatam, Krishna clearly says that jiva swabhavaha yed anugrahataha santi nasanti edupekshaya. Without my permission, even the jiva swabhava will not be manifested. So that free will is a dependent free will. Yeah. And there are 3 stages to that. So again, this is, as I said, this is called jiva kartrutva. So there are 3 levels in which the philosophy there is, the 3 levels in which God allows a jiva to perform its activity. So one is called Purushakya Prayatna. Then the second level is called Anadi Karma. And the third one is called Jiva Swabhava. So the Lord is supposed to take these three and then take that into consideration before he gives that limited free will to the jivas. You cannot tell me that I am not going to make any effort. Because God is making everything, he is deciding everything, I am not going to make any effort. No, that will not happen. Purushakya Prayatna should be there. You should make an effort. The effort that you make will be dependent on your past karmas that will influence your efforts in this life. And that past karma will be dependent on your swabhava of your jiva. So at three levels that it operates, and God makes your free will operate based on these three levels. And that essential summary there is, it is a dependent free will. So the jiva gives instruction to the intellect to do this. But for the jiva to do that instruction, it is under the control of the Supreme. The Supreme makes it do things based on the three criteria that I have described.
Madhu?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thanks, Peter. Thanks. Great question.
Yeah, wonderfully explained and everything. I think it's all like, people are becoming very happy because they
I have one question.
Yeah,
Can
go
I
on,
ask?
Vidyamani.
Very good evening, sir.
Good evening, Vidyamani. How are you?
Yeah, sir, you told no, like you have to come out from samsara bandha, then only we can attain Brahman. Then only we can concentrate on Vedas, Upanishad, like that. Not concentrate, then only we can start reading like that. Prayers, you told first start from prayers like that, okay? First step is we have to come out from samsara bandha. How to do, sir? How to come out from samsara bandha?
So I think if you have a solution, pass it on to us. It's really, really difficult, isn't it? But I think the key there is we need to first understand that the samsara is not our place of permanent abode. Okay, so that is the first thing that we need to understand. This is not our permanent place. And then the second one that we need to understand is that this samsara is not all happy and hunky-dory. This samsara is full of suffering. So that is the next key thing that one needs to understand. Until we get these, so this understanding that everything, this is not a permanent abode, that everything is impermanent, that is the first one. And the second one is that I need to get away from this. Okay, so this you get when you get vairagya. So that is where your starting point should be, is that you need to understand everything is bad here, everything is suffering. I need to find that place where it will give me eternal happiness. So that point is called vairagya. Okay. So I think last week I was mentioning a verse from a great philosopher called Jayatirtha. He said, "Ihahi vividha samsarika dukkha darshanena viraktasya samadama matahe mumukshoho adhikarinaha tan nivrittayai paramananda avaptyai cha sakala jiva jadatmakat prapanchat paramartata eva atyanta binnam." And it goes on. So basically what the first two lines is, you have to go through samsara. Anybody who has escapism is not going to succeed. That is clear. We are here. We have to go through samsara. You have to be in it. You have to live in this world. But this is your experiment. You are actually seeing what's happening. You understand that dukkha darshana. You need to have seen the dukkha darshana. Then you get vairagya. Then you become a mumukshu. That is when you become an eligible person. When you have that firm belief that this place is a place of suffering. Then what you do, sama damadi mumukshoho adhikarinaha. Sama means dhamma. You know sama and dhamma, control of the mind, control of the sense organs, and other qualities that you build in. Then you decide, I want to get rid of this suffering. I want to go to that final place where there is eternal bliss. That is where you start. So your start is when you get the vairagya. So you need to convince yourself that you are in a place of a temporary abode. And everything that you are getting here is temporary. Your happiness comes, your suffering, then your suffering comes. And Krishna describes this very well in chapter 2 for you, about how things change continuously. So you need to be able to be, you need to be cognizant of that. So you need to understand and firm up your belief that this is a temporary existence, that you want permanent solution to your problem. If you get that, then you start your progress. Then you find your final destination. I think the problem here is most of us run our lives from we are born and then we die. Most of us run through this life without even realizing that actually there are these problems of impermanence, of suffering, and so on. So none of them actually look at it. So they are all Nitya Samsaris, the Charvakas. They just go through pleasure, feeding pleasure, and go on in life. One day they drop down dead without actually knowing where have they come from, what is their purpose, where is their destination. So many of them do not know this. 99.99% do not know this. Krishna again captures this very well. He says the 99% of them do not even know these questions exist. Then he says some people make an effort. Even among them, 99.99% will not reach me or know me. So this is a difficult process. But I think just because it's difficult doesn't mean we should not do it.
Madhu.
Thank you, sir.
Madhu, I have just good evening. I have a small doubt. Yeah. See, when it is in the Brahman, Nirguna Brahman, all the three philosophical schools, Dvaita, Advaita, Visishta, where everyone says it's infinite and it is non-material and it is no defects, no form and everything. We agree with it. If that and it stays as such and it's stoic. In that case, what is the relationship between a Jiva and a Brahman? If there is completely, the relationship between a Jiva and a Brahman, how does it work out? Because the Brahman itself is completely devoid of any gunas. And how does it matter to the Jiva?
Okay, so I think, Janardhan, my first question there is, I think it's an interesting question that you're asking. So my first throwback to you, if I may use that word, would be is, where in the Upanishads or the Vedas or Sutras are we describing that Brahman is without any gunas? If you say no material gunas, everybody would agree. Whereas if you are saying it does not even have non-material gunas, I think there are differences. I think for people like us, the key there is none of us seen Brahman. Yeah, we have not seen Brahman. Yeah, we have not been to moksha, so we don't know how it is going to be. Number one, and we have not even seen the jivas. We are saying yes, I am the jiva, but who has actually seen the jiva? We have not seen the jiva. We have not seen the Brahman. People who have reached moksha have not come back and said, look, this is how moksha is. So we do not know the answer. So to get the answer, what we go to the revealed scriptures which talk about transempirical things such as dharma, adharma, karma, jiva, brahma, swarga, naraka, moksha, and all those things come from the scriptures. So we base this from the scripture. So I'm yet to see a verse in the Upanishads or the Vedas or the Sutras that actually describe Brahman as nirguna, in the sense devoid of even non-material attributes. I have not seen a verse. If you could kindly provide me a verse, then maybe we can have a discussion about that. So that was my first answer to that. That we are so Brahman is nirguna in the sense it does not have material qualities. It is saguna in the sense that it has transempirical qualities. To describe Nirguna Brahman as Nirvire, Nirvishesha, Nirakara, Nirguna Brahman, and somehow on it a Mithya Avidya, somehow a Sadasat Vilakshana Avidya superimposed on it, and the Nirguna Brahman became Saguna Brahman. Okay? It is a hypothesis. It is a very interesting hypothesis. If any evidence is provided in the Vedas or the Upanishads, I would be very happy to receive that, and then we can have a discussion on that. So far, with my whatever reading I have done, or having read through the acharyas like Ramanuja and Madhva, Vallabha, and so on, I have not seen any evidence of an attributeless nothingness Brahman. Because if we go into that direction, that Nirguna Brahman is no different from the Sunya of Buddhist. There is actually no difference between the two. So it becomes a bit problematic Here you're saying that there is a God, but this God is attributeless, is as good as nothing. So in that case, why bother having a Brahman if he is a zero? There is no purpose in having such a Brahman. So that would be an argument there. So coming back to it, so some of us accept that Brahman is full of sagunas. He's sort of infinite auspicious attributes, and he is infinite, and he is pervaded everywhere, including inside you. And the jiva is, yes, he's got an amount of Satchit and Ananda, but it is a limited Satchit and Ananda. Everything in him is limited. He is Alpa Shakti, he is Alpa Guna, he is Alpa Kriya. Okay? But in liberation, he will be able to experience his eternal blissful state. However, there are differences there as to whether that experience of his bliss is on par with Brahman or as per one's capacity. So there are some differences in various schools, but nevertheless, that experience of your bliss is still real, and that it is limited. So there are varying, diverging views, but I think claiming Brahman to be completely inert being, then I don't see any reason as to why we should all waste time talking about something who is an absolute zero.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I think we are Kalai, yeah, if you want to make a final question, please, because we really time.
Okay, is it time? Okay, I can ask him next time.
No, you can ask now, please.
It's okay, Kalai, go on.
Kalai, thank you. Hi, I'm Kalai. I'm Madhu's classmate, Madhu Suda's classmate, calling from Miami. Madhu, thank you for the excellent lecture. I've just started, my journey. But I just have one question. In Tamil, there is a saying, right? Like actually, Vidiyai Madiyal Vellalam. Like actually, we can change the fate. Like, so for example, when one person shows a strong drift towards one path, right? Can we change that path? Like actually, like using our mind, like actually, like, or is it, should that person accept that it is part of the journey, like a destiny? How much effort can we make it? Like actually, like, the mind says like, yes, we can make a change, but somehow the circumstances makes it's not possible. At that point, like, should we get frustrated, like actually, or should we even keep on trying? Like, that's from my own life experiences, I'm asking this question.
Yeah, Kalai, thanks a lot. Very nice to see you on video after 25 years, I think. So you're
Yes.
thinking exactly the same. So the answer there is, so there is a very famous verse called Mana eva manushyanam karanam bandha moksha yoga. Okay. So that particular verse, again, in Gita also it is there. You're saying it's your mind which is responsible for your bondage, and it is your mind that is responsible for your release. So everything is in your mind, that how you control your mind. Yeah. So I don't think any of us should give up. So I think it is trying to train up one's mind. The training up of one's mind is all what chapter 14 of Bhagavad Gita is all about. So the chapter 14 of Bhagavad Gita talks about the sattva state of the mind, the rajasa state of the mind, and the tamasa state of the mind. What are the different states of the mind, and what are the consequences of different states of the mind, and how you should try and train up your mind more and more that it drifts away from the tamasa state and the rajasa state and more towards the sattvic state of the mind. And the sattvic state of the mind means, and again, there are some such beautiful verses in chapter 14, particularly around verse 16, 17, and 18. Please look through that. It talks about sattvic state of the mind is the desire to have knowledge, is the desire of the knowledge that gives happiness, is the desire to have knowledge and happiness to find your direction and so on. So you can train up your mind to, that is your material mind, to actually lead you to that path of Shreyas. So Krishna talks about this quite a lot in chapter 14. So check that chapter out. But the answer there is absolutely yes. No matter what hardships that we go through, no matter what state of mind it is all practice. Abhyasena tu kaunteya. So there is a verse, Abhyasena tu kaunteya, where Krishna is saying Abhyasa means practice. The more you practice, the better you get. Yeah. So it is about perseverance and practice, and train up one's mind to sway more towards the sattvic state. That would facilitate our journey.
Okay, thank you.
I think everybody else, Madhu, thank you very much. We probably, we are finished with the time today. And we can all meet next week. And anybody has got questions from today's session, you can all keep it, and we'll probably take it on next Sunday. Same time, 5 o'clock. And we'll all give a big hand to Madhu, please.
Thank you very much, Madhuji.
Yeah,
Thank
yeah.
you.
Most
Thank you,
welcome.
Madhuji.
Thank you.
Thank
See
you.
you next week. Take care.
Thank
Thank
you.
you,
Bye
Madhu.
bye. Bye
Thank
bye,
you.
everybody.
Thank you, Madhu. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ramesh.